Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. This is, I believe, the 9th episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And I have as my very special guest, Library of a Viking. Hello, Johan, how are you today?
Hi, yeah, I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a huge honor.
Well, the honor is mine, and I actually want to begin with a little story that I have started. I mentioned in another video, but I think it's important to me. This is sort of an acknowledgement because when I started my channel, of course, I think this is true for most people when they start channels on YouTube. Most of the people who subscribe are people who actually know you in your ordinary real life, right? So your friends and your family and maybe some acquaintances or colleagues, that sort of thing. And that's who my first few subscribers were, except that eventually a few people who had no idea who I was did actually start subscribing, and people who are actually passionate about fantasy. And that was really cool. That was the moment when I thought, oh, this actually could go somewhere. And you were one of the very first, actually, you very early on in the channel, who in my channel, in the life of my channel, you were one of the very first persons who you didn't know me in real life, but you just sort of came along and said, hey, you sort of sound like you know what you saw through my terrible video making ability.
No, it wasn't terrible at all.
They were marginal, perhaps, but you saw through the bad audio and everything else, and you actually said very encouraging things to me, and that I want you to know that made a huge difference for me. That was really the difference between me saying, okay, I really suck at this. Why am I doing this? And actually saying, you know what, people seem to like what I'm saying, and maybe I've got something I can do here. And that kind of encouragement was really very important and very early on in my channel. So I want to thank you for that. That was tremendously just wonderful and kind of you to do that. So it is my honor and my privilege to have you here today on Dear Dr. Fantasy.
Yeah, well, it kind of blows my mind that you still remember that I left those comments. But yeah, it's been really fun to follow your journey. And I also want to thank you because I definitely feel that at that point in my life, I had been watching a lot of booktubers, but we don't really have many academics really in the fantasy booktube community. And I just really remember I was at a point in my life where I read a lot of fantasy, and it really emotionally impacted me in ways that I hadn't experienced before. But the people around me, they didn't really express or talk about fantasy in a way that had much literary value. It seems like people a lot like focus on the escapism aspect, and maybe maybe there wasn't as much literary value, but I really felt like the way the fantasy impacted me didn't really correspond to how people talked about fantasy. So when I discovered your channel and just hearing an academic talk about fantasy as a genre that has literary value, it really helped me to understand that it's actually okay for me to read a lot of fantasy, because I really do gain a lot from it. And I think you just really helped me to understand that like the genre deserves more credit than it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's funny because I totally agree with you that the genre has plenty of excellent works within it that are worthy of critical exploration. But there is this sort of perception, mostly from people who don't read fantasy, that it's all fluff, and that can make us sometimes, I think, maybe even those of us who know better, we feel a little guilty almost for being so passionate about these wonderful stories, which is absurd, of course. We shouldn't feel guilty. They are beautiful stories. They say so much about the human experience, the human condition. And in fact, I think fantasy has advantages over other genres in that respect, because it encourages our capacity to imagine, which is what really is at the heart of storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that experience of almost feeling bad, because I remember when I rediscovered my love for reading. I would tell people, oh, I love to read as a hobby, and people would ask, well, have you read this classic or this classic? And usually I would just say, no, I haven't read them, and I would almost feel bad. And I would think, like, am I spending my time like wisely? Should I really read these books that I'm actually not that interested in, just to gain more I don't know, literary insight into the genre and stuff. But yeah, I think watching your videos really gave me some kind of peace that it's okay to just read what you want to read.
Yeah, wow, that makes me feel really good. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's part of the mission of the whole reason I started doing this really was to say, hey, this is a
yeah,
genre that is rich with wonderful stories that have so much to say to help us wrestle with life, and
yeah.
that to be able to engage with people like you and so many of our other friends here on BookTube about these stories in a way that is affirming of our passion, and at the same time acknowledging that these stories have so much to tell us, so much to teach us. That's my bliss right there. I mean, this is
Yeah,
what it's all about. So couldn't be
yeah.
happier to know people like you. So speaking of your I guess your guilty pleasure and coming back to reading and all of that.
Mm,
One thing I always ask my guests is about their personal literary journey. Like, how did you get to
mm.
be the person you are? What are the stories that you consider to be formative in terms of your passion for not only fantasy, but for reading and stories in
Yeah.
general? So whatever might come to mind.
Mm.
And usually people think of like 4 or 5 other important books after after they've
Yeah.
done this, but whatever springs to mind, because I think it's interesting because we often talk about our current like top 10, or our favorite reads of the year, and those can change. I
Yeah.
think that those can slightly change over time. But what doesn't change is the books that formed us, the stories that
Mm.
brought us to where we are. So I like to find out about that. So take it away.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, really. So my reading journey starts back when I was probably like 5 or 6 years old. Started reading these. So in Scandinavia, these Donald Duck comics are really popular.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
I remember I used to read these Donald Duck comics, and I had so many books of these comics, and I just absolutely loved them. And actually, my grandfather, he told my parents that you should really encourage him to keep reading these comics because that will really help him to engage with reading, and he'll probably pick up other books later in life. So my parents, they bought me, and my grandparents, they bought me loads of these comics that are mostly just entertainment value. I wouldn't say there's much literary value in those comics, but
Somebody
just
should
having that
write a
encouragement.
dissertation. Somebody should write and someone has written a
Yeah.
dissertation on Donald Duck, I'm sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Yeah,
I don't
yeah, I'm
know,
sure.
but
I'm sure someone has.
yeah.
So just really like growing up in that kind of environment where my parents encouraged me to read, like no matter what it was, they just were happy that I was reading, even though my parents aren't like avid readers. And then later on in life, I picked up, as almost everyone in my generation, I picked up Harry Potter,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
that just blew me away. I felt so immersed. I felt so attached to these characters and the world, and it was just really magical, a magical experience. And those books are quite chunky, so yeah, it's just a really, really good experience as being a young teen to read these chunky books
Yeah.
and just really grow up also with these characters. And later on, I picked up His Dark Materials.
Oh, yes. I
Absolutely
love that.
loved
That's
His
a
Dark Materials.
great trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah, I barely remember anything from it, but I remember that I felt so immersed, and I loved the animal companions in that world.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
And that's a level of animal companion that is quite different from any other, really. I guess I shouldn't say too much about that, but it is really, because it might be spoilery, maybe, I don't know,
yeah,
but it
maybe.
is really quite beautifully done, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I would love to reread actually His Dark Materials someday because
Yeah.
I've been told later on that it's full with atheist themes throughout the trilogy, and I did not pick up any of those themes as a young kid. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it'll be interesting to see if that's true. But yeah, nonetheless, it was a really great experience. First Harry Potter, and then His Dark Materials, and
Yeah.
after that, I still read a bit, but I didn't read as much. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I really rediscovered my love for reading 3 years ago.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
And
So
what,
my wife,
let's
yeah,
actually, if you don't mind, let's talk a little
yep,
bit about Harry Potter and His Dark Materials.
mm,
Then we can talk about what brought you back.
yep,
But but first I would like to just remark that I'm just a little older than you are. So I
Only
didn't get
2-3 years.
I didn't get to grow up with Harry Potter. So
Yeah.
or even his Dark Materials. I was an adult when those series came out. So, but I did get to experience them with my daughters. So that was really cool, actually. So
That's cool.
while I was too old to be, I guess, of the Harry Potter generation, way too old, my two daughters experienced what you were describing, and both of them, particularly the younger one, became very immersed in all things Harry Potter, and it was a lot of fun to read those books alongside them. We even
So have you read the books?
I had read all the books. I've read all the Harry Potter books. I even in my fantasy novels course, I've taught Harry Potter, the Harry Potter and we call it the Sorcerer's Stone. I know you call it the Philosopher's Stone over there.
Yeah.
But I've taught that book several times in my fantasy novels course. Because believe it or not, there actually is a fairly rich amount of critical material on the Harry Potter books. So academics have gone there for sure. And then, of course, his Dark Materials was one that, with my older daughter, I read alongside her. And so I read his Dark Materials as an adult. And I found it to be a very engaging read. And I suspect that it would be very rewarding for you to reread it as an adult.
I can imagine,
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, those are wonderful childhood influences to have had. So I'm a little envious of you in that respect. But I had my Tolkien when I was a kid. So it was when I was 12.
Did you grow up with Tolkien?
Absolutely.
Just kidding.
I mean, I was actually born a year before he died.
Really?
Yeah.
When did he die?
He died in 1973.
All right,
So yeah.
It's quite a while before I was born.
Yeah. Most booktubers were not around when Tolkien was alive. That's a fair statement, I think. So I was just barely around when Tolkien was alive. I don't remember that particularly well because I was one, when he passed away. But
that is also a trilogy I really need to reread because after his Dark Materials, I did pick up The Lord of the Rings and I did read through it, but I mostly just pushed myself. I did enjoy it, but it was nothing like what Harry Potter and his Dark Materials did for me. Mostly because of the prose and pace and stuff like that.
Yeah, it would be a different ask, I think, today. Although my daughter, the younger one, read it when she was like 12, I think. But she was always has been a voracious reader. So
she was on your channel, wasn't she? Like in the beginning.
Yeah,
I think I remember. She read Stormlight and stuff like that, didn't she?
Yes, that's right. She's read the first 3 Stormlight Archive books. She actually read probably half of the 4th one and said, this is too much about, the science-y parts kind of bored her. And so she sort of just too much of the, she actually DNF'd Rhythm of War.
Well, it seems like most people agree that that's the worst book in the series. Although I haven't read it.
She felt like it was just too tedious. That's a reveal here on my channel. I haven't mentioned that before. Yes, my daughter did DNF Rhythm of War. I have not started it yet. I will eventually though read it. Well,
I've still only read the first book in the series.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Yeah. So she read Mistborn and the first 3 Stormlight Archive and liked them actually. So we had the video on that, and she was in a Harry Potter video. It was one of the very first videos I made. She was in a couple others. What's the Greek mythology one? Percy Jackson. We did a video on Percy Jackson, which she's read many times as a kid. My older daughter did a video with me, a couple of videos as well. So yeah, they've been on the channel.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
It's
do both of them read then?
Sorry?
Do both of them read?
Oh yeah, they're definitely readers. Yeah, the 2 of them. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Although these days it's tough because there's a lot of competition with the devices and screens and everything else.
Very true.
But I think that reading is something that gives you a very different experience from anything else, and they both realize that. So yeah. So anyway, let's talk about what brought you back. So after years of wandering in the wilderness, what brought you back
Yeah,
to reading?
yeah, it's a very good question. So I actually started dating back then. Now my now wife, and she is an English literature student, or she was. She studied English literature and history
Oh,
at that point
smart.
in my life. So
Yeah.
I remember she lived in the UK. I lived back home in the Faroe Islands. So I came down here to visit her, and yeah, like just hearing her talk about literature obviously did excite me, and being in love probably helped. And I remember we walked into some bookstores, and I just really felt that I had that longing to get back to reading, because when I was a young teen, reading was a like incredible special time and really helped me to relax, and was a really good like form of entertainment. And my parents and everyone still encouraged me to read.
Yeah.
So I remember I walked into the bookstore, and at that point, It by Stephen King, the movie, was just in the cinemas, and I saw they had this chunky book by Stephen King called It, and I didn't even know that was a book at that point. So
Ah.
I thought, well, I used to enjoy reading chunky books as a teen, and this book looked good. So I just picked it up, I bought it, and that was just, I started reading it, and the first 100 pages, I felt so immersed. And it's the first time in my life that I actually felt a tiny bit scared reading a book, which has never happened before. So just having that experience of
Ah.
actually experiencing excitement again about a book was really impactful. So I read that book, probably took me 2 months because I wasn't in training to read, and it's a chunky book, it's more than 1,000 pages, but absolutely loved it. Incredible characters, incredible plot. It just really blew my mind, especially considering it's a horror book. So I thought it was only going to be like people getting murdered and scary elements, but there were a lot
Yeah.
of like really heartfelt moments, and I just really started loving these characters and the journey they went through. And that then led me to reading more Stephen King. I knew I had to read more after experiencing that. So I picked up The Stand. Have you read The Stand?
Not yet. No, we're going to talk about Stephen King because you actually early on encouraged me to
Yeah.
try out Dark Tower, which I am in the middle. In fact, right
I'm
now,
so glad you are reading
yeah,
through it.
yeah, me too. We're going to talk about Dark Tower, but but the only thing I've read so far is the Dark Tower series. I'm not done yet. I'm actually
All right.
starting book 5, Wolves of the Kala now.
All right.
So, but we'll talk about
Oh,
that in a moment.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
so
But yeah,
basically, you're telling me that you started reading again to impress a woman.
basically. No, I've not. So we were on a long distance relationship. So I also had to have something to keep me company, I suppose, when she was in the UK and I was back in the Faroe Islands.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, that probably definitely helped. Being surrounded or being like hanging out with a person that loved books definitely
yeah. Oh,
encouraged
yeah.
me.
That is a beautiful thing, actually, in my
Yeah,
opinion. That's really lovely to have
yeah,
that. To have that to bond over is
mm,
really cool. Yeah. So.
yeah. That's yeah, incredible. And I read some of the books she has recommended, and she's currently reading The Wheel of Time. She has read Mistborn after I recommend them, so she's definitely also dipping her toes into fantasy, which is really cool.
Cool. Very
And then
cool.
yeah, as you said, you can bond over books, which is yeah, like I mean, how can you not fall in love when you talk to a girl about books, really?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, geez, it doesn't get better. It doesn't get
Yeah,
better. So.
yeah. But I remember then I read The Stand. I absolutely loved it. So that really started my kink phase, I suppose. And everyone online just kept talking about The Dark Tower. That was like Stephen King's main work. And also I learned that all his books connect somehow. So I definitely knew I had to read Dark Tower, and
The
that
multiverse. Yeah.
the multiverse, yeah. And
Yeah.
wow, like I've only read The Dark Tower once through the whole series, but I still think about that series on a frequent basis. I've never encountered a series like The Dark Tower since then.
I
It's
don't think
really
there's
mind blowing.
anything I know that's quite like
Mm,
it, for
yeah.
sure. And if you think you know what Dark Tower is after reading The Gunslinger,
Mm,
guess again, because every single book has surprised me.
yeah.
And the way that I just can't predict where these
You
books
can't
are
predict
going.
anything.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely crazy ride reading through that series,
Yeah.
and I'm of the opinion that book 5, 6, and 7 are fantastic.
Good.
So
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
fight me,
I so
Mike.
far
Agree.
I'm liking book 5 so far.
Yeah,
I know that that's where some of the fandom diverges.
definitely. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard Mike's book review talk about his reasons for why, and I totally get that. And
Yeah.
he also waited for was like a decade between the books. So I suppose there's so much tension built up at that point.
Yeah.
So it'd be quite easy to get disappointed. But I read them back to backs, and that probably helped me not to get disappointed by the series.
Yeah, yeah, he's rereading the series now, as you know, and
Yeah.
I'm sort of trying to time my reading to coincide closely to his, although I've had to start, they're starting on the 19th appropriately,
All right.
with Wolves of the Kala, I believe.
Yep.
I actually have just started it now because I had to time it. I have other books I have to read soon after, and they're big ones. So I need to start reading Wolves of the Kala. So I'm cheating a little, starting a little early. But yeah, they're doing one a month, I think, and starting on the 19th each month. So
all right.
I'm gonna try.
Yeah, and Song of Susanna is definitely, I think it's one of the shorter books as well. So
oh, thank goodness.
That's quite nice. Yeah. But the last book is a chunky book. I think that's over 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
So
wow. Okay. Yeah. Wolves of the Kala is around 700, I think. So it's not a small book. But I've just found that King's prose is so engaging. Yeah. And that he has a very, to me anyway, and it's interesting because I'm American. And for me, Stephen King has a very American voice in his writing. It can be very slangy. It can be very folksy at times. And he can do lots of things. He has really good range as well as a writer. But I find his writing to be incredibly engaging, in spite of the fact that he often spoils his, what's going to happen in the very book that you're reading. He's like, and she's going to die, but wait to see how it happens, and so, okay. I mean, that's a pretty skilled author who can pull that off and still keep me on the edge of my seat. But I do like, I personally really do vibe with the voice that he often has in those books, which is to me a very American voice. And do you find that to be the case?
That is a very good question that I probably won't be able to answer, since I've only lived in the UK for 3 years. So even for me, differentiating between the US and UK when it comes to slang and language is often difficult.
Oh, because it's not, so English is, we should point out to everyone.
It's English, my third language, actually.
It's your third language, so it's not your first language. Maybe we should explain a little bit about the Faroe Islands, because not everyone, perhaps, I know what they are and where they are, but
well, I'm actually quite impressed that you know about the Faroe Islands. Most people have never heard about that country.
I was very much as you know, I'm a history buff and also very into all things Old Norse. So I've read the sagas. I know pretty much. I have a very good sense of like the whole Viking expansion west and the settling of Iceland. Of course, the Faroe Islands are on the way. So I do know about the Faroe Islands, and they do turn up in the sagas occasionally too. So but please do, because I know there's a lot of history there. And please tell everyone what language you speak and a little bit about the Faroe Islands for those who don't know.
Well, you probably know more about the Faroe Islands, at least like when it comes to the sagas and stuff, than I do, to be honest. But yeah, the Faroe Islands is it's a tiny country in the North Atlantic Ocean. So between Iceland and Scotland, in the middle of the ocean, there's a group of islands. They're very small, 18 islands. And we have so we're not fully independent. So the way I usually explain the status of the Faroe Islands is that it's a bit like what Scotland is to the UK. But Scotland is, so we're part of the Danish kingdom. Right. And so is Greenland as well.
And Greenland,
So a bit like Scotland isn't a fully independent country, the Faroe Islands isn't fully independent, but we have our own government, own language, own flag, own culture. And I lived most of my life in the Faroe Islands. And Faroese is my first language. And then we learned Danish.
Right.
And then English.
Interesting. So Faroese, is Faroese actually closer to Norwegian than Danish, do you think? Or is there?
Probably. So it's very close to Icelandic. I'm not sure if that's
close to Icelandic. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's helpful for anyone really, but
it is
very
for
close
me.
to Icelandic.
It is for me because Icelandic is a language I can read at least.
Oh, really?
So, you
could probably like catch some of the Faroese sentences though if you read them. Because they are very similar, especially in written form.
I suspect I could in written form. I would be lost in a conversation, but when I studied,
You read the Bloodsworn Saga, haven't you?
Oh yes, oh yeah.
Were you able to understand the magical spells and stuff?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Really?
I can understand that much Icelandic, because I studied Old Norse, and modern Icelandic is not that different from Old Norse. So I know that there are differences in pronunciation, but if just the written form, it's interesting because modern people in Iceland can read the sagas without much trouble. Whereas English speakers, if you look at something from the 1200s, most English speakers will not be able to read English from the 13th century. They'd be like, what is this? Because English has changed a lot more because of the particular history of the language and all that. But so you would say
more isolated.
So can a speaker of Faroese then read the sagas without too much trouble, like someone from Iceland?
Probably, yeah. I haven't read the sagas in the original language, but probably.
Okay.
I'm guessing, since it's quite similar to Icelandic, and the language that John Gwynne uses in his books, I can read and understand like 95 to 100%.
Okay.
It reads very similar to Faroese.
Okay. All right, then I suspect that you probably could, with maybe a dictionary handy, read the sagas.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I need a dictionary.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Have you been to Iceland then?
I have not. That is definitely on my wish list.
Bucket list. Yeah.
A bucket list of things to do before I kick the bucket. So I definitely want to visit Iceland, and I would love to see the Faroe Islands too, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a tour.
Cool.
If you ever come, definitely.
All 18 islands?
Oh, probably not all of 8. Well, the good thing about the Faroe Islands is that the islands are very close to each other, so it's quite easy to get around. But yeah, and you can also drive in between a lot of the islands through undersea tunnels and stuff. So
there are undersea tunnels.
Yeah.
Not bridges.
We have one bridge connecting two of the 2 islands, but yeah, undersea tunnels. We have an undersea roundabout as well.
That I did not know. Wow. So why go with tunnels rather than bridges?
Probably because of the distance, and also the ground. Like the rocks are really, really hard, so it's perfect for tunnels. And it's less of an eyesore, I suppose. Yeah. The infrastructure is like surprisingly good, considering it's a group of islands in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. So you can get around quite easily in most places. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, anything else that people should know about the Faroe Islands?
It's a good question. Well, we're only 50,000 people.
50,000. Okay.
Yeah, 50,000. So yeah, we're not many. And I don't know if anyone else from the Faroe Islands is doing BookTube at all. So I'm probably the only Faroese BookTuber out there.
Well, if you're Faroese and you're watching this, please let Johan know that he's not alone.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is awesome. And you do live in the UK nowadays.
Yes. Yeah, I moved here 3 years ago for my studies. Okay. Yeah, I'm a bit of an older student. I worked for 3 years in a bank before coming to the UK, and I wanted a university degree, so quit my job to come here and study.
That's fantastic. A lot of my students are older students because I teach at what's called a community college here in the United States. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but okay, you are. Yeah, so most of them are straight out of high school, but a larger percentage of students are older students who are just coming back to school to basically redesign their lives. They want to start a new career, and I have so much admiration for those students. And sometimes I actually think a few years of maturing out in the world is one of the best things you could do for your education.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And in Scandinavia, it's so common for people to take 1 or 2 or 3 years after doing your A-levels before going to uni.
Yep.
That is almost like the norm. So when you go to uni, a lot of people will be 21, 22, 23, or even older. It's super common. And I totally agree. That maturity has helped me so much throughout uni, and has definitely given me an edge, I think, compared to some of my classmates who are 18, 19, and 20 years old. being
Yeah.
25. It just helps you with time management. It helps you, yeah, with everything really.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I don't know about you,
Mm.
but when I was 17, I turned 18 the summer after I graduated from high school. I
Yeah.
had no clue, no idea
Yeah.
whatsoever what I was going to do with myself. I
Yeah.
really had just, I mean, all the way through college, actually. I
Mm.
finished my bachelor's with a degree in liberal arts, and I was
Wow.
21 years old, and I had no idea what to do with myself.
Mm.
So I think that's true for, I mean, some people just know and they go through that with super focus, and that's
Yeah.
awesome. But I just don't think that these days people necessarily have a grasp of their life course when they're that young, you know?
Definitely not. Yeah, when I finished my A levels, I hated maths. And I was so excited to choose a university degree that didn't have anything to do with maths. And then I got this apprenticeship at the bank and
Oh,
absolutely loved it. And now I'm studying business management. So just
ah,
if I didn't have that experience, then I probably would have studied something totally different, and that probably wouldn't have been the right match for me. So yeah, if anyone,
wow.
if yeah, just go out and work before you go to uni.
So
It's
is
really
the
helpful.
yeah, I think it's a good plan for many people, honestly.
Yeah.
It really is. But so is the ultimate plan for you, perhaps, maybe you don't know, but are you intending to return to the Faroe Islands after you've done your studies, or are you open to whatever?
It's a very good question. Yeah, I'm open for whatever, basically. But
Okay.
I'm gonna do a master's as well. So I'm finishing my undergraduate in 1 week, actually. That's my last deadline.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm
Congratulations.
really, I've been really looking forward to this chat to just get a break from all the deadlines and
Oh
just
my
talk about
goodness.
fantasy.
Yeah.
But I'm doing a master's as well, so I still have a year left of study,
Okay.
like student life, and then we'll see what happens. But
Awesome.
yeah, both my wife and I have absolutely loved living in the UK, and
Yeah.
yeah, wouldn't have gotten into like the book community really if I
Oh
hadn't
my
moved.
goodness. Yeah, I love the UK as well. I have spent a fair amount of time
I'll have you.
in the UK, in England and Wales. I would love to go to Scotland someday as well,
Mm,
and love to go to Northern Ireland and Ireland someday as well. But I've been to the England especially, but also Wales. So yeah, England, I don't even know how many times I've been there, mostly in the south, but I did make it all the way up north to York.
oh
So
really? Do you have family down here, or how come you've been so often
I do have
in the UK?
in-laws. So
All
my
right.
wife has a couple brothers who live over in the UK. Yeah.
Mm,
But even before that, I went over there because I just, you can imagine me being someone who's really into Old English
yeah.
and that sort of thing. England was always sort of a place of great mystery and wonder and history and all that for me. So I guess when you could call me an
Yeah.
Anglophile in some ways. You know, I love the layers that you have over there. If you go to London, you know, there are so many layers to that city. There's, of
Yeah.
course, it's dominated by modern London, but if you care
Mm,
to look, you can find stuff going all the way back to Roman ruins,
mm,
you know, which is fascinating to me. And as much as I like a city like New York, the amount of layers you have can't even compare to that sort of
yeah.
thing. So, uh, yeah, that's a place that I is dear to my heart as well.
That's awesome.
I totally get that you love it over there.
Yeah. Well, if you ever come back, then let me know, and we'll go to London and grab a pint.
Sounds like a good plan to me. Sounds like a good plan. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So let's go back to books, though, I guess. So after you got into King,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a big leap from there to fantasy, but what were some of the first fantasy
Mm.
reads that you started up with?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. So while I was reading The Dark Tower and I was getting close to the end, I went to YouTube. I really felt like I had to hear someone talk about The Dark Tower, or at least find someone to talk about it, because it's just such a mind-blowing, creative, imaginative series. And yeah, I went to YouTube and I found a video by Daniel Green, who I'm sure
Aha.
you probably have heard about, but he made a couple of videos about how all the books in the Stephen King universe are connected,
I
and he
think
was also
I've
reading
seen
through the.
that video. I actually think I've
Yeah,
seen that video. Yeah.
yeah, it was quite popular. It's one of
Yeah.
his, I think, one of the more popular ones. And yeah, and then I just watched some of his videos, and then I started binge watching his videos. And he gave me so many recommendations. The first time I heard about Mistborn, First Law, and the Stormlight Archive was through Daniel Green.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So for that Christmas, I received the Final Empire from my brother-in-law. He knew I was interested in the Mistborn, and he bought me the Final Empire. So I started reading that, and
Cool.
that again, I was absolutely hooked. I was so immersed, and I just absolutely loved it. And that really started then my fantasy phase, which has been ongoing now for 3 years.
So you have something very important in common with Patrick Leo then.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Mistborn
and I also need to reread Mistborn.
Yeah.
There's so much nostalgia surrounding that series, but it'd be interesting to see if it still holds up on a reread.
Yeah, I've read it once myself, and I enjoyed it, but I was already an avid fantasy reader at that point. For me, Sanderson is kind of a newcomer.
Yeah, he is, isn't he?
I mean, he's obviously a very established and important writer for the genre. And in fact, arguably, he probably brings in more new readers to fantasy than any other author, I would guess. So we definitely all owe Brandon Sanderson a huge debt of gratitude, I think. I mean, I could be wrong on that. I have not looked that up, but my impression anyway is that probably after Harry Potter, I guess, right? I mean, Harry Potter is definitely even ahead of Brandon Sanderson in terms of bringing in people to the fantasy, probably. But after that, probably Brandon Sanderson's books.
Probably, yeah. He just needs to get an adaptation to take him to the next level, I suppose, at this point.
Yeah, and you mentioned that in your video the other day about the possibility, and you seem to think it's not going to happen right away. Your prediction was it's going to take a little time for that to
I think it's going to take a while.
And he's going to be
he has mentioned he has mentioned before that he would rather like wait for the right studio to come along, because he doesn't necessarily need the money to he doesn't need to sell the rights straight away.
Right.
But yeah, I mean,
he could probably
doing an adaptation.
I would guess he could produce the thing if he wanted
from all the money from the Kickstarter, I suppose. But yeah, like another adaptation of the Cosmere would be crazy expensive, especially if he wants a high standard.
And where to start? I guess if I were doing it, I've only read Mistborn and the first 3 Stormlight Archive books, but I would guess that Mistborn would be a logical place to start, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it feels very much like reading almost a movie, the Mistborn trilogy. So, but I could also see it becoming like possibly like a game in the future. It has a lot of those mechanics with the hard magic system and so on.
The allomancy and all that would be I'm sure a very engrossing game for sure.
Yeah, that would be incredible. So yeah, but when I started reading again, I binged read series, which I don't do anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, I read the whole Mistborn trilogy, and then I read the whole Wheel of Time back to back, 15 books. And yeah, that was like quite an experience. But yeah, after finishing the Wheel of Time, I was definitely very hooked on fantasy.
Interesting. I think I may know why. I could be wrong, but let me guess why you don't binge read series these days. And I think one reason could be, and something I've felt, is that BookTube does not reward reading through a series very well. When you do a review of a book, but first of all, book reviews are like some of the lowest viewed videos these days, which is sort of weird to me, but I think I know why. But even more so, if you're reading like a 10 book series, the review of book 1 is going to get more views, but as you get further into the series, you're going to have more drop off as you get further and further into the series. So it, in a way, unfortunately, BookTube sort of punishes you for reading straight through a series. If you're intending to, because we, as you know, if you're going to make videos about books, you're constantly reading. And if you're deciding, okay, I'm going to read book 7 of Malazan now, and I'm not going to get very many views, or am I going to start book 1 of, X popular series right now, right? What's going to get more views? Well, it's probably going to be book 1 because more people want to hear about that, right? So so it's the situation. Is that part of the reason why maybe you're not going straight through series as much?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons. I also think since I started like getting involved in the book community, I've been on this weird journey, I suppose, from like starting on Instagram, and then I grew so much that I actually started receiving books. So I would receive like arcs and stuff, and that was really, really exciting. It's still exciting whenever I receive an arc.
Oh yeah.
But receiving an arc was almost like Christmas, and it felt really special, especially in the beginning. Still does, but especially in the beginning. So
Yeah.
I would read so many like first debuts in so many different series, and I've been doing that now for quite a while. But I'm actually trying now to cut back on how many review requests I accept and how many arcs I request, because I have so many books on my shelf that haven't been read now for the past year. And yeah, I kind of miss binge reading series and just reading whatever I want to read, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you actually built up a following on Twitter. And interestingly, I knew you as Library of a Viking on Twitter, and I did not know for the longest time that you were the same person as that person who subscribed to my channel early on. I had no idea that you were one and the same individual. So I knew you in two different ways, I guess. So, and Instagram too. Now I'm not on Instagram, so I didn't know about your presence there, but I do know you on Twitter as Library of a Viking, or I knew you there. And then when you started your channel, I was very excited, because I thought, oh, this guy, he knows what he's talking about, and he's really cool. And you started making videos, and I thought, oh yeah, this is going to go really well. And it has. You've actually grown very fast.
Yeah, it's been crazy, really.
Yeah.
But I had 2 videos quite early on that went really viral, and that just gave me a massive boost. But before those videos even went viral, Patrick Leo gave me a shout out when I was on 300 or 400 subscribers, I think. And that gave me like initial 300 more subscribers. And also being quite active on Instagram, especially, which is actually my biggest platform.
Okay, bigger than Twitter.
It definitely helped.
Yeah.
I think it's around 15,000 followers there.
Wow.
So that also gave me the first 100 subscribers initially when I started my channel, having that platform. But yeah, it's been really fun. It's been very time consuming, but also very rewarding.
Yeah, time consuming. Yeah, it's like running a BookTube channel. It can be like a second job. It really can.
Yeah.
In your case, you're a full-time student and you were doing this, and it doesn't really pay like a second job, but
definitely not.
Not even close. I mean, you're gonna be in big trouble if you try to make a living from BookTube. But it takes that much time, and so you have to be passionate about the books to do this. There's no other reason for doing this, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the book community, like becoming a part of the book community is definitely one of the best things that has ever happened to me. But sometimes I also feel it has changed how I think about books in general. So when I go into a bookstore, I will never just pick up a random book anymore.
Oh no.
Because I'm always looking for like some specific authors, and in some sense, I kind of miss just going into a bookstore and trying to, I don't know, just discover some new authors in those kinds of ways. But there's definitely more good things about the book community, but it has definitely changed how I find new books and stuff.
Yeah, I already know looking ahead what series I'm going to pick up most of the time based on the buzz. Like I'm definitely going to pick up, for example, a series you really like, the Greenbone Saga. I'm going to read that because I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Patrick obviously talk about it. I've heard lots of people talk about this with so much enthusiasm. I'm like, well, I guess I have to read that. And I'm hearing now about Ken Liu's Dandelion Dynasty a lot. So I'm like, oh, I guess I know I'm going to read that, So obviously when you do that, you're not going to pick up some random unknown thing. For me, the unknowns that I'm still reading are the self-published books that I've agreed to read. So those can be fun because that keeps that element of, hey, I'm going to read a book that not as many people are talking about, and I get to say what I want to say on it. And maybe if it's really awesome, I even get other people to read it and that sort of thing. So that's a cool way, I think, to both retain that feeling of picking up something unknown but also do maybe a little bit of service by shining a spotlight on those deserving self-publishing authors, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one of the best things about like my journey in the past 2 years has been reading self-published books. I've discovered some incredible books, but again, a lot, like I've also read some quite bad ones. And you don't have any reviews to go on. So I suppose it's one of those high risk, high reward kind of situations.
It is.
But when you find a hidden gem, it is such a fantastic experience. And also you can chat with the author, and it makes a huge difference.
Oh, that is so nice. I mean, there are a few very established, successful authors who will talk to us here. Which is wonderful in my opinion. I love that. But yeah, most of the time they are way too busy for a channel with 12,000 subscribers or something like that. Which is understandable. They have to spend their marketing time where it's most effective. But the self-published authors, it's so much fun to sit down and talk with them, because you get to hear about how they, their ideas, where they came from, and the process itself is kind of fun. I think a lot of people here on BookTube like to learn about the process of publishing, which can happen in several different routes these days. There's not just self-publishing, but there's indie press, there's hybrid publishing, and of course there's the traditional publishing, and many little gradients in between all those. So it's cool to be able to talk to authors and absolutely.
And one of the reasons why I love self-published books is that you know for certain that the author is writing this book only because he or her are very passionate about the book. They're not doing it for monetary gains, because most self-published authors never earn any money from it. They just do it because they're really passionate about the story they want to tell. For sure.
I think my impression is that even people who get into traditional publishing are passionate because you don't know if you're going to make it. It's the stupidest gamble in the world if you're doing it to make money. I mean, if your goal is to make a lot of money, don't be a writer. Just don't, because the odds are very, very low that you're going to hit the jackpot doing this.
Especially in the fantasy community, I suppose, which is even more niche than like crime and
I suppose romance. I don't know what the sales numbers are, but regardless, there's just a lot of competition and a lot of people who want to do it, and there's a very small window of success, I suppose. So it's something that you have to spend a lot of energy, a lot of time, and there's no way that most people who do it are actually. I would hate to calculate how much someone earns from doing all that. It would be below minimum wage, I'm sure. So you're doing it because you're passionate. But if you become, I suppose it can happen where a very successful established author is in the traditional publishing industry and is just writing because they know every book they put their name on is going to make money. I suppose that can happen.
Maybe. But you have people like Stephen King, like he doesn't need money, but he just can't stop writing, can he?
I mean, I think in his case, I don't know him at all. I would love to talk to him, but I think in his case, he's writing because he loves doing it. That would be my guess. And I don't think he's one of those authors where there are certain authors I've heard about who are very successful, but they don't even write their own books anymore.
It's crazy, isn't it?
They have this factory system where people will they employ people who actually write their books. They give them an outline, and these poor unknowns, grabbing at any chance to be a writer, will write the book, and then the famous person will just stick their name on it after maybe editing a little bit. I think, wow, that's so soulless.
That is crazy.
But anyway.
But you're in the process now of potentially getting your book published. Do you feel like you have the capacity to think about anything else than your book at the moment? Because you're in a really exciting stage of life.
I do. I mean, I just finished grading, so that's all I was thinking about yesterday. Was grading. But I will say that I am very excited to be where I am now in this process. Very soon, my literary agent will be doing the pitch. So I am really, really nervous and excited. But lately I've had the incredible honor of having some of my literary heroes read my book, because my agent a couple months ago said to me, why don't you try to have some of the authors that you've come to know a little bit read and perhaps endorse your book with a little blurb, like the sort you might find on a book cover that in theory at least gets people interested in the book. But the reason for it was to try to get a publisher on board. So, if I can have endorsements from XYZ well-known authors, then perhaps that would help the pitch. So I did that. I was very scared.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it was frightening to reach out to these people who I respect so much and whose work I have enjoyed so much, and say, hi, I wrote a trilogy. Would you mind reading my book and writing something nice about it? Essentially that's what I'm doing. So it was nerve-wracking, but I'm pleased that all of the authors that I asked said yes.
That's cool.
And I have some of the blurbs back already and ready to go for the pitch. And I'm just like, I have to confess, I've read those blurbs probably like 100 times each because they're like, wow,
I would have done the same thing.
So I'm excited by what the authors had to say. More recently, I actually had Ed and Will from the Brothers Gwyn.
Yeah, I saw. Well, I didn't watch the whole thing. I saw the first 15 minutes of that, which is really positive, wasn't it?
I mean, I knew that because of their particular backgrounds, because of their reading experiences, that they would get a lot of what I was doing in there. And sure enough, they really did understand a lot of what I was doing. And not only that, but we had it was like a 34-minute discussion, this non-spoiler. We talked for 2 hours after that about spoilers. And
that is mad.
They were so on target and so helpful with their feedback. And there were even little things like, because they're reenactors and they know a lot about weapons and chainmail and all kinds of stuff, that they have a depth of knowledge there and experience that I don't have. So they were able to correct me on a couple of things even, which is really fantastic to say,
that is cool.
This part here, you need to tweak that because this wouldn't have been this way. It would have been this way, and I was like, oh, wow, that's so cool, So yeah, I was very, very, very grateful for the two of them to have taken the time to just read the book, and the fact that they enjoyed it was just, because you don't know, you just feel like you're writing this story and you feel like this is compelling and should be interesting, but you don't really know how are other people going to experience it. And of course you share it with people but they're going to be nice to you mostly, aren't they? So it's when you get it out there. And of course the fact that I have an agent and that he found it, compelling enough to think that, yes, this is a book, this is a story that's people are going to want to buy this and read this. So, and of course I have to say one of my biggest sources of gratitude is to my friend AP Canavan, who is a critical dragon. And I had him do the developmental editing, for me. And he is just so incredibly insightful. And it was at a point where I didn't know how to make the book better, and he found ways to improve things. So it's been a long process for sure.
I've heard from a lot of authors that having an editor is one of the most, if not the most important thing in the whole process.
Yep. Because that pair of eyes, particularly a pair of eyes that is very trained and insightful, like AP's, they're going to pick up things that you don't see. It's very hard to step outside your own story. I think the best way to do it, if you don't have any other way, is to write it, put it down for a year, and then come back to it. And then you've got a kind of fresh pair of eyes, and you're like, why did I do this? And oh, I can do this better now, So when it feels a little bit foreign to you, then you're able to pick up on stuff a little bit better, I think.
I can definitely imagine that. So I have a question. So you probably know that a lot of booktubers and like book bloggers are going to read your book and are going to review it and criticize it.
Yep.
Like how do you feel about that potentially good friends of yours might be quite critical? Like, do you feel nervous about that, or are you very excited about that?
I'm actually,
do you not think about that?
I'm more excited than anything. I am perfectly willing to have my book go out there and have somebody who knows me or a friend say, I don't like this, this is not for me. And I expect that. We have a genre that has a lot of different, a lot of diversity in it, and a lot of different types of stories. And some people like urban fantasy, right? And some people like, steampunk or whatever. I mean, there's just so many different things. And my book is definitely, I think of it as I think Ed and Will remarked, and I agree. It's a sort of blend of classical and more modern fantasy. And not everybody's going to like that, and that's okay. That's fine with me.
I'm sure it'll be good.
I hope so. I've worked.
You just have to promise me that it won't be 20 years between book 1 and 2.
Yeah, no, because they're all written. So that's
are all of them written? All right.
Yeah. So
very
all
cool.
3. So the books 1 and 2 are just. I had AP look at both of them. They are absolutely done as far as I'm concerned. Wow. If a publisher picks them up, an editor at the publishing house might want me to do this, that, but I don't anticipate it would be anything major. So books 1 and 2 are just absolutely polished. Book 3 is finished. I have written book 3.
Wow.
It's all the way done. And I have, I'm in the process right now of going through it one more time before I actually ask AP to look at book 3. Get his feedback and go over it again. So essentially it's done. Just want to polish it, really. And then I've also written a standalone sequel.
Have you?
Yeah, wow. It's in a similar condition as book 3. It's basically written, but I would like to polish it some. So yeah.
Wow, that's very exciting. I'm really looking forward to reading that.
Yeah. Well, how about you?
I'm expecting it'll be good.
I hope so. I let's just say I'm a bit biased, but I think it's good. So.
It's really good to know at least that you are confident in your books.
I am confident in my books. I worked hard to make them beautiful and compelling. So and I learned a lot in the process. Oh my goodness, did I learn a lot? I will say that they're way better than they were when I started. What about you? Are you interested in writing at all?
I received this question a lot, but the short answer is no. I'm not. At the beginning of the pandemic, I started to think that maybe I should give this writing thing a go. So I read Stephen King's books on writing, which I really enjoyed, but also because he gives a bit of insight about like his life and stuff, which I really enjoyed. But I suppose reading that book really made me realize that writing is a skill and a talent in a lot of ways, and it's much more challenging than I initially thought.
It is same here. It definitely, I had to learn a lot that I didn't know at the time I needed to learn. Yeah.
But I remember my wife at the beginning, she really encouraged me to at least try to write like a short story or something. So I promised her I would give that a go, and I tried to sit down, I think 3 times, and I just hated it. I hated what I wrote. I read it and I was like, this is so horrendously bad. I had no idea what I'm doing. I had no idea how to write compelling characters or create a plot or anything. But really, before getting involved in the book community, I've never been that creative. I've tried like loads of different instruments, and I've always given up quite quickly. And a lot of my friends are very creative, but I've just never really been creative until I started like book blogging and stuff. So I suppose I probably just lack a bit of that creative gene. in that sense. But yeah, the more I read, the more I become convinced that I'll probably never be an author, because it just truly blows me away what some authors are able to do.
Well, I will say it's an incredible amount of work to get to that point where you can tell a compelling story. But it's like for me, I think, yes, talent is there. It's a factor. Some people are definitely better at some things than other people. That's just a fact. You know, maybe you're blessed with good genes and you're really good at math. And maybe my genes or whatever are not great math genes. But I will say this, I can get better at math by working at it. And it's like you go to the gym for the first time ever in your life and you try to bench press. How much are you going to be able to bench press if you've never done a push-up or you've never bench pressed before? You're not going to be able to bench press very much. But if you go to the gym on a regular basis, week after week after week, you're going to get to the point where you can bench press more and more and more. And the same is true with writing. Anybody can get better at it.
Definitely, yeah.
You know,
I think I could probably get better at it. Or I know I could get better, but I don't think I would ever reach a level where I would be, pleased with the quality. And I'm not sure if I would even really enjoy writing that much.
You have to enjoy it. You have to enjoy it, I think, because like I said, you what was it?
You spend so much time.
It's so much time. It's so much effort. And, what was it? Samuel Johnson in the 18th century said, "No one but a blockhead ever wrote for anything but money." You know. And the truth is, you don't make money at it most of the time. So it's a huge learning curve.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, Stephen King. Well, basically the essence of that book on writing is that he said you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot to become a good author. And I definitely read a lot, but I haven't written anything since those 3 hours at the beginning of the pandemic. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I don't know, life might change, but for now, I don't. Also, I've never had any ideas for any stories or any characters or anything, so that part definitely doesn't come naturally to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting to think about, where do stories come from?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it?
I don't really know the answer to that, except that perhaps in some way, what happens for me, at least creatively, is I think that the stories come from this soup, this cauldron of stuff that all the stories I've ever read in my life or encountered are in that soup. They're in that cauldron. And what comes out when I scoop up a bowl of soup, and make a story, is probably in some ways an amalgam of all that stuff. Not only just stuff I've read, but my experiences, places I've traveled to, and people I've known, and all kinds of experiences go into that. And somehow that, and it's kind of cool actually, that creative process, that bubbling up into something that takes a more definite form, that follows a pattern, I suppose. And then you just sort of feel like, okay, this is cool. I can do something with this. And you start writing it down, and then you build on that. And it sort of, for me, at a certain point, writing in the beginning is hard and it's a pain. But once you're into it and you're hooked, it's like being in the zone. It's just, you can't describe that feeling of euphoria unless you've experienced it, because it's just, wow, when I'm writing, time is irrelevant. It's just, I'm in that world, I'm immersed, and I'm having a fantastic time creating. I think anybody who creates, who does art or music or what have you, can relate to that, probably that feeling.
Yeah, my wife, she loves to paint and draw, and she does experience that whenever she paints. And if she doesn't paint for a while, she will really feel the longing to go back and create. And I don't know why, but I've never really experienced that kind of emotion when I've created anything, except maybe more in recent times when I've been editing videos and I've seen like a video going from horrendous to actually being quite decent. And that has been quite satisfying.
You work hard on your videos too. You do a lot of actually really cool editing and stuff. And it shows. They're wonderful videos.
Thank you. I still feel like I want to learn so much more about editing. But I suppose you can never fully learn everything about editing.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of your videos, I was very interested in the one you made the other day about the future of fantasy. I thought
Yep.
that was an interesting topic, and you made some interesting speculations there, I think, and I left a comment, which is you know
I have that. Yeah.
basically agreeing with you about a couple of those things, but I hadn't thought a ton about some of the aspects of what you had talked about in there, like the audiobooks, for example. And I think you're probably right. Based on what I'm not an audiobook user yet. I keep threatening to try. And I think I will try with maybe a series that I've already read.
That's really good.
Or
maybe your own book someday.
Oh, maybe my own book. Yeah, I would probably want to listen to that audiobook, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, the First Law is a big candidate for me because I hear that's really well narrated, and
that is, incredible.
Dresden Files is another one that a lot of people recommend. I'm only 4 books into that series though, so but I could try the first 4 books, I guess. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting speculation on your part about audiobooks. And the other thing that I thought was really cool, one I hadn't thought about at all, but you're so right, I think, is the expansion of all these very special editions, right?
Yeah, that's all the rage at the moment, and it really hurts my wallet to see all these special editions. And have you heard about the Broken Binding?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I see their books and I lust after their books. Yeah, but it
must be crazy expensive to get shipping to the US.
I would imagine. I actually have not caved in through my temptations yet, but I still have I have a graduate student mentality still when it comes to buying books, and I tend to be a cheapskate. So I don't have a lot of beautiful books in my book collection. But that doesn't mean I'm not immune to admiring the beauty of those books that I see. There was one just put out by this fairly new press, I think in the UK. It's a new edition of The Blade itself. You saw that, right?
Yeah, I don't think I can justify spending £200 on that, but I would love to.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It looks like it's some really fantastic artwork. Patrick is a very naughty fellow because he's always showing me these beautiful books, right? And tempting me with, he's the one. He's a very bad influence.
He is, especially when it comes to your TBR.
Yes, that too.
He adds 8 books to my TBR a month.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy who I see what he's talking about on his channel. I know, okay, I guess I'm going to be reading that in 6 months or a year or whatever. So, but I'm really happy about my First Law collection as it is. So I currently own all the First Law hardbacks except The Last Argument of Kings in hardbacks and signed by Joe Abercrombie. So nice.
I think I'll just have to keep telling myself that is enough and not to go spend an additional £200 on one book. But yeah, it's a very nice edition, definitely.
I got the newest trilogy. I have trade paperbacks for all the books except for the newest trilogy, The Age of Madness, where I wanted to read as soon as they came out. So I bought the hardcovers.
Nice.
And the last one, actually, even I got a signed copy from Alan from the library.
Oh, that's cool.
He sent that to me for my birthday, actually. It was very nice of him. So I actually have one signed Joe Abercrombie book, which is cool. Yeah, The Wisdom of Crowds, which is probably my favorite Abercrombie book, actually.
That one or A Little Hatred are my favorites. I need to reread the First Law trilogy as well. Well, I read it. I really enjoyed it, but it didn't blow me away. And then I read Age of Madness, and that absolutely blew my mind. So I think on a reread, I will probably enjoy the First Law trilogy even more than I did. I definitely did enjoy it, but it just didn't reach the heights that I did expect. Interesting.
Yeah, it blew me away the first time I read it. Even from the first page, I just thought, wow, okay, this is gritty. This is action packed. This is going to be interesting. And
Yeah.
I loved the first trilogy. I love the standalones even more, actually, I think. You've read the standalones too?
I've only read Best Served Cold.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay. Yeah. I bet you'll like the heroes. But we'll see. I guess you'll probably read it someday, but
I will definitely read. I'm gonna read it sometimes this year. I am a bit worried that I won't enjoy the heroes because I've heard it's a huge battle, and
it is.
while I do enjoy like action in my books and stuff like that, it's usually my least favorite aspect.
Yeah.
But I've heard that he has a really interesting take on the like epic like battle. So
yeah,
I'm sure I'll probably enjoy it. But
the entire
we'll
time, yes, it's battle, but it's Abercrombie. So the entire time he's doing character work. While he's giving you this extended battle. It's not all, killing and carnage and battle. There's stuff that happens in between the killing and the carnage too.
Yeah.
So it is very Abercrombie-esque. And then there's also the short story collection, which is maybe not as good for me as the novels, but they're still definitely worth reading. Sharp Ends is that collection.
I'll definitely read all of them. But yeah, I'm also a bit worried about that short story collection. I haven't had many good experiences yet with short stories. They usually leave me a bit unsatisfied. They end too abruptly, and you don't have the time to connect with the characters.
They're actually harder to write in some ways.
Oh, I can imagine.
They're actually harder to write than a novel. And Abercrombie is one of the very best at novels. I can say that without hesitation. But short stories are a different beast. And I think that it can be a challenge, especially if you're used to a longer form. And there are people who are really talented at short stories, and that's kind of what they do. And I teach short stories when I teach intro to literature, and some of them are just really good. Like a lot of these famous writers were actually better short story writers than they were novelists. Maybe William Faulkner being a possible example of that. But it's very hard to write a compelling short story, and you just have so much less space, and everything has to count in a short story. Whereas with a novel, you get to take your time doing things, and it's a different beast. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, regarding those special editions, I think joining Instagram has definitely impacted how I knew about my book collection. I post photos of my shelves of my books, and you definitely get more likes if you have beautiful books to show. And I didn't care about having matching editions before I joined Instagram, but now I'm almost religious about having matching editions of a series and stuff like that.
I wouldn't do so well on Instagram if I showed pictures of my crappy used graduate student books.
I remember you did a bookshelf tour, didn't you?
Once? I did, yes.
Yeah, I remember that was quite painful.
Where I have
you had a lot of great books, but like there were no matching editions.
I mean, I bought a lot of them old and used and worn, and of course I've used them and they've gotten even more worn. Like my Malazan Book of the Fallen, I have like 3 or 4 different editions in that, and some are the mass market paperback, some are the trade paperback, and some are the hardcover, and it's just a mishmash of everything. And that,
it's definitely cheap and sorry.
Yeah, no.
And it's probably better for the environment as well to buy used books, to be honest.
Perhaps I can say that I'm an environmentalist then.
Yes.
But it was painful for a lot of people, I think, to see that. But oh well.
Oh well. Yeah. Did you see Johanna's recent?
I did.
Shelf?
I saw Joanna's bookshelf tour. Yeah. She's got.
And she has a very minimalistic approach, and she only keeps books that are meaningful to her. And when I saw that, I thought I should probably adopt some of her wisdom in that sense.
I agree. I think she's very wise in that and other respects. But I think that's something I wouldn't mind doing someday, is saying to myself, you know what, I'm never going to read these books again. I should donate them to someone who will read them, perhaps.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the best book you read this year so far, or some of your
Ooh,
favorite ones so
oh
far?
my goodness, my favorites for the year.
I'm putting you
Well,
on the
I'm
spot.
loving Dark Tower,
Yeah.
and I will say straight out that uh, Wizard and Glass is one of my favorite books I've read this year, for sure.
Mm,
I
yeah.
loved Wizard and Glass. That will be certainly among my top reads of the year. And I don't
Wizard and
know.
Glass, like reading Wizard of Glass was such a strange experience for me.
Yeah. How did
I
you
read
like
it
it in
in,
the series? Yeah.
yeah, because I know it's one of, like, people absolutely love that book, and a lot of people say that it's their favorite book of the series. But I remember when I read that, I was so anxious to get to the tower.
Ah, okay.
So I didn't enjoy reading 700 pages of, like, Roland's backstory, but it really did help build up his character.
Oh my
And there's
goodness.
some wonderful characterizations done in that book. But I was just so anxious to continue the journey towards the tower that I just, like, sped through it so quickly.
Oh.
So yeah, I didn't enjoy it as much as I probably should have. But
Maybe it helped me that people told me ahead of time. It's basically a long flashback,
yeah,
and there's a frame narrative, but that's, in the present of the story, if we can call anything present in the Dark Tower,
yeah,
because of everything with time and everything. But yeah, I was sort of given a heads up about that, and maybe that's why I was fine with it. Plus, like you said, I felt like before, Roland was already an iconic character for me. An
yeah.
absolutely just cool, mysterious character. But I didn't feel super attached to him as a human. And I even was a bit repulsed by his obsession with the Dark Tower. I mean, let's face it, he does some kind of sketchy things, particularly in the
Yep.
first book, in the pursuit of this. It's very like Ahab
So
going after
ruthless. Yeah.
the white whale, in Moby Dick. It's that level of obsession
Yeah.
where you don't have any morality outside of that. So I was fascinated by this guy, but I
Yep.
didn't really love the character until I read Wizard and Glass. And then I was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
here's where he's coming from. This
Yeah.
is what's made this individual. And now I feel so much more invested in the character too. So it brought the series to just from obviously already top 10 for me to wow, okay, mind blown.
Yeah.
I really loved it, my increased investment in his character. So
yes, an important book in the series, definitely,
I
for
think
those
so.
reasons you just mentioned. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. And then I went and read the book 4.5.
Oh
The
yeah. How did you?
prequel.
Yeah, I saw your review on that one.
Yeah, I loved it. I actually loved it. And a lot of people told me, no, wait till you're done with the 7 books, then go back and read it in publication order.
Yeah.
But it just happened to be a time when I was flying to ICFA, and I needed an airplane read, and it's the perfect length for that. So I just said, I'm just going to do it, and I did it, and I'm glad. So it might not be publication order, but I followed chronological order, at least in the Dark Tower books.
Yeah.
So.
You can definitely read it after Wizard and Glass, but
Yeah,
it's a bit of a weird one. But yeah, I also enjoyed it.
I mean, which Dark Tower book is not weird?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just wait until you get the Song of Susanna.
It gets weirder.
Oh man, it reaches new heights. Song of Susanna. It's probably the most crazy book I read since I started reading fantasy, to be honest.
Wow.
It is absolutely insane, that book.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm actually up for insane, so I'm up for weird. So that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Otherwise, you'll hate it if you're not prepared for a lot of weirdness.
Yeah. No, I'm good for that. I like something a little bit different in my reading, so I'm totally down for that. But so cool. What about you? What are your favorite reads of the year so far?
I read some really great books. So I read Piranesi quite early this year.
Lovely. Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. In some sense, well, I wouldn't really compare it to the Dark Tower, but it kind of left me with those feelings of being like really imaginative and weird and original.
Otherworldly.
Which is just Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was
Yeah.
looking for.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just beautiful writing, and
Yeah.
it's really nice to read a standalone every once in a while.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, we fantasy readers, we always get like hooked into these chunky, extremely long series. So just
Yep.
reading a short standalone was really refreshing, and I did not see that ending coming. So Paranisi
Uh-huh.
definitely, yeah, 5 out of 5 stars for me. And I need to read something else by Susanna Clark. You read Jonathan, what is that? It's Jonathan
Jonathan
Strange.
Strange and Mr. Norrell. Yeah, it is very different from
Mm,
Piranesi.
all right.
It's, I mean, different in almost every possible way. It's a very long book,
Yeah.
and it's very stylized to
Mm,
mimic the early 19th century kind of style of
yep.
writing, which she does superbly.
Okay.
And it's there is a bit of similarity in the eeriness, I guess, and the haunting nature of it. There's some of that,
Mm,
but it's really a very different kind of book. And you would almost be surprised that it's the same author, except that Susanna Clark is immensely talented, and I admire her writing in both cases.
yeah.
And there aren't a lot of writers who could pull that off, frankly. Write something in a very different tone and style from what they
Mm,
did before. So she has my admiration for that, just that
oh,
alone. But I
yeah.
do highly recommend it. But it's a big, long book, that's for sure.
Mm. Is it fantasy?
It is, yes. So there is
Yeah.
magic. There is magic.
Yeah.
Most definitely fantasy. So think kind of like early 19th century with a good dose of magic, you know.
Mm,
So yeah, kind
interesting.
of like in the rivalry between England and France, there were
Mm,
always ongoing wars. So that's sort of the context. But with a very, at first mysterious, but a kind of a very, I guess, sort of grim kind of magic to that world that is something that gets increasingly important as the story goes on. So,
all right. Definitely interest peaked. Yeah, we'll
yeah.
see if I get time to read that chunky book.
Yeah, she's
But
a
it's a
very talented.
standalone, isn't it?
It is a standalone, so it has
Yeah, that is.
that going for it, I think, too. Yeah. So yeah. So
Okay.
what else besides Piranesi have you read this
Yeah.
season?
So I've started the Life Ship Traders
Oh,
trilogy.
wonderful. Yeah.
Ship of Magic. It's the first book.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I've also read the Mad Ship, and I've actually just started. Actually, have it here. Just started Ship of Destiny.
Oh,
Um,
great. Yeah.
so good. So yeah, I gave Ship of Magic 5 out of 5 stars.
Yep.
That's definitely one of my favorite reads of the year. Yeah, Robin
Cool.
Hobb she just continues to blow me away with her writing, her characterizations, and
Are you going
especially
to?
now coming to Ship of Destiny,
Mhm.
it really does start to emotionally impact you that
Yeah.
some of the trauma these characters, like some of the trauma that these characters experience in the first book,
Yep.
she brings it off back like thousands of pages later on,
Yep.
but just shows that the trauma is still there, but it has changed, and these characters have matured, and it's just fascinating that it just seems like she thinks so deeply about yeah, like emotional trauma and what that
Yeah.
does to human being. It's not black
Absolutely.
or white at all.
Yep. Yeah. Few
Well,
writers deal with the consequences of traumatic events like
yeah.
Robin Hobb does.
Mm,
And she is one of the very best at characters and relationships between characters in the business.
yeah.
And that's a tremendous trilogy. I need to read the rest. I've only gotten Farseer
Mm,
and Life Ship Traders read myself. So what about you? Are you going to keep reading in Realm of the Elderlings?
yeah. I'm planning on reading the whole thing, but I'm not sure. I hope to. I'm definitely going to finish the Life of Traders this year,
Okay.
and then we'll see what happens. But whenever I come back to Robin Hobb, it just hooks me into the story, and her writing just it truly speaks to my soul, and her
Yeah.
characters are so incredible, vivid. They're relatable. Yeah, and like again back to the element of trauma, her characters usually deal with trauma in a way that I almost feel like I would deal with trauma. So
Yeah.
they don't go on a like revenge rampage or kill everyone or anything. Um, they go through so many different stages of grief, and yeah,
Yep.
it's just astounding, really. It does
Yeah. The way
impact you emotionally
she gives
reading her books.
backstory to the characters too as she fleshes them out, and even characters that
Mm,
you might feel repulsed by.
yeah,
you end up kind of understanding in a way that's
Yeah.
very human. So, which I found to be not quite as true of Farseer. In Farseer, because it's a first-person narrative,
Yeah.
we never really get into the heads of the villains in Farseer at all, actually. And they're just kind of more villains, you know, they fulfill that role very effectively, but we never really get the nuances. Whereas, and that has its benefits, obviously, too, because I don't think there are many characters that people feel as attached to as Fitz.
Yeah.
So that obviously has its benefits. But the downside is you feel like the villains in Farseer are a bit like kind of stereotypes.
Yeah.
Whereas for me in Live Ship Traders, there's no character that doesn't evoke my a sense of connection to me in a very human way that I find extremely powerful. So I would say that for me, Live Ship Traders was the trilogy that told me, oh yeah, this is the very best, you know, character work, you know. So I loved Farseer too, but for me, the character work in Live Ship was just even better. So
yeah, and I also think the character dynamics are a bit better in Live Ship Traders. They're a bit more complex. Yeah, totally agree with her character work is some of the best. And as soon as when you get hooked into Robin Hobb's books, then like you really can't put the books down. And even though they're very slow paced, they're just so rewarding. And these characters really stay with you.
Well, that's another thing that you talked about in that video where you were predicting, you know, future. And I remember, I can't remember who it was, but somebody left a comment about Robin Hobb specifically and the slow pacing of her books, which, you know, they can be a slow burn. I've said that myself, particularly about the first book in each of those trilogies. But my goodness, what you can do in writing is so different in some ways from the storytelling that you do on a screen. I feel very strongly that both have their benefits. Both, you can do things on a screen better, some things like, for example, action, than you can do in writing. But in terms of making me feel attached to a character, I don't think you can beat the written form. I think that there's there's a capacity in the written form to develop a character in ways that you just can't do even in a certainly not in a 2 or 3 hour film, but even in a television series over the course of weeks. I really feel strongly that even as talented as actors there can be, you know, in these series, I just think that there are strengths that we have in the written form that don't exist on the screen. And I would hate to see those go away because writers are imitating screen stories. But that seems to be the direction we're going. And you talked about TikTok books. that kind of conjures fear in my heart, that very term, you know.
Same.
So I love action. Don't get me wrong. I love fast-paced books sometimes, but there has to be a place, and I think there will be, for books like The Realm of the Elderlings, where you have these beautifully told stories that take their time so that we feel immersed and invested, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree about that. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I really hope that we don't lose like slow-paced books totally. But I've heard you talk a lot about Daniel Abraham in the past year.
The Long Price Quartet.
Yeah. Would you say that his writing is quite similar to Robin Hobb's writing in some ways?
In the Long Price Quartet, that's all I've read of Daniel Abraham. Absolutely, yes. In the sense that in this series, he is clearly interested in the characters and in the relationships between the characters, and he's really, really good. He's a wonderful observer of humanity, and that's what makes these books tick, is the development of the people, and it's clear to me that the plot is something that serves that development. And I mean, he'll do the action. Most of the books don't have a lot though. I mean, the first book particularly is like, there's kind of one event and it's over in a page, and then the rest of the book is about the build up to that event and the consequences from it. And it's a lot of just psychological development, and it's brilliant.
It's very interesting.
It's really brilliant. There's a little more in the third book in terms of just action, because that's the most filled with conflict, like battles and stuff. But even then, I felt like it was more about the characters and what was going on within them leading up to the battle and after it. And so it was more about consequences than about the action itself.
Wow.
So
yeah, that sounds amazing. Like the books I tend to enjoy the most are character driven. And I love when like an author is able to craft a really compelling plot. If the plot has a lot of politics and stuff like that, it's definitely one of my favorite aspects, not necessarily the action. But I did read, so Orbit sent me a copy of Age of Ash, which is the first book of the Kithamar trilogy, I think it's called. And I didn't really enjoy that. But I haven't seen many good positive reviews about that book, to be honest. I saw Library of Alexandria.
Yes.
He was quite positive on it, but that book that did not work for me at all. So I should probably give the Long Price Quartet a try.
I think so. Yeah. If you like Hobb's writing, I think there's a good chance that you would enjoy LPQ. The fourth book, Price of Spring, just had me in tears at the end of it.
That is high praise.
It's really because of the buildup that was done in the first three books, but you follow these characters over the course of their lives, and you feel like you know them. Like they're people in your life. It's really quite incredible what he achieved there. So yeah, I don't know if he was going for something different in Age of Ash or what. But
a lot of people say that at Daniel Abrams' books, you don't really fully appreciate the first book until you read the second or third. So it might be one of those cases that
I think that's true for LPQ too. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
So
you can
maybe, but I'll have to read some of his other books first to see if it's worth coming back to Age of Ash, because that was quite a slog actually.
Really?
For me.
Okay. Yeah.
So. Yeah.
I think that could be the case with Long Price Quartet as well, where you're like, when is something going to happen here? But then when you go back and you realize what he was setting up in that first book and how it is connected to the later books, oh wow, this is actually really cool. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and I totally agree like about characters and having slow moments. And you mentioned before, and I totally agree with that. John Gwynne, he's becoming better and better at having slow moments in books.
Yes.
Even though they're so fast. Yeah. Even though they're so fast paced. It just really shows you the importance of actually having slow moments. So even though TikTok might make books slightly faster paced, you can't get rid of slow parts. Totally. You need those to really connect with.
I totally agree.
Characters.
I mean, he had some in the earlier, like you go back to Malice and Faithful and the Fallen. And obviously he was just gifted at describing action from the very beginning. He was incredibly good at it. It was the second book, Valor, in the series, where I just found myself thinking, this is fantastic, but I need a break, I need
allow me to breathe.
I need some quiet. He had a couple in there, but I wanted more of that. I could see he's good at this, but I wanted more of that. I felt even more strongly about that way when I read Rage of Dragons. That was a book that was obviously, okay, Evan Winter's brilliant at action, but come on, let's just, how about something else here, But in Gwyn's case, I got to Ruin and I realized, okay, this book is a level up from the first two. And I realized he has really started to get the role of these quieter moments. And I thought that Wrath was similarly great. And I enjoyed, on a technical level, I think A Blood and Bone is superior in some ways to Faithful and the Fallen. Although I know people have tons of attachment to the
Yeah,
characters in Faithful and the Fallen. So people tend to, I think, like Faithful and the Fallen the most.
I think so. Yeah,
But I think on a
yeah,
technical level, his writing improved even in A Blood and Bone. And now in Bloodsworn, my goodness, I think he's just mastered. He's everything now. There's so much to say about that. And if he sticks to landing, and I'm sure he will,
I think he will.
because one thing you have to say about John Gwynne, his last books are always fantastic.
Yeah,
They are just page turners. But I'm sure he'll stick the landing, and I think it'll be, for me, a top 10 series when it's all said and done. But
yeah, I can't wait for that. But yeah, I agree. I prefer The Faithful and the Fallen. I think I should have taken a bigger break between reading The Faithful and the Fallen and Of Blood and Bone, because even though they are different, they just felt a bit too similar. Like, yeah, so I got a bit of Gwyn fatigue, I think.
Yeah.
But it was still enjoyable. I'm really glad I read it.
Same here. In fact, my favorite character in the Banished Lands is Drem, actually.
Oh, is it? All right.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I think for me as a story, Faithful and Fallen probably edges out A Blood and Bone. But my favorite character in the whole of the Banished Lands is definitely Drem.
Yeah. And I'll also definitely agree with you about the Bloodsworn saga. It just feels like Gwyn has matured so much as an author, and he has really become a master of crafting a plot now and characters. It's incredible, and it really feels like you are in a Norse-inspired fantasy world. It's awesome. I love it.
I do too, and I think he just mastered everything. Even for me, he always had moments in the earlier books where I would reread a sentence and say, wow, that's beautiful. I love that way he's phrased that. But I felt like the opening to Hunger of the Gods, it blew me away with how awesome
it just blew me away.
That writing was that could be, that is high tragedy, that is epic, that is just beautiful writing.
And the tension in the opening chapters is immense.
Yep. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, he's got everything going now. He's firing on all cylinders in that book, I think. And I found it, that's another big, favorite of mine for the year, for sure.
Yeah, same for me. I know some people have said it's not as good as Shadow of the Gods, but
I strongly disagree.
Yeah. I thought it was better as well. Also, I just felt more attached to the characters, and adding the 2 additional POVs it worked perfectly for the story. It raises the stakes and helps you to understand the other side of the conflict. It was brilliant, I thought. But also, when I picked up that book, I had read a lot of average books for the past month. I had read 3 average books, and when I just picked up the Hunger of the Gods, it was just exactly what I needed at that point. So that probably also didn't impact my enjoyment of the book, but wow. It was so good.
Yeah, sometimes it's timing and expectations, and these are factors that can affect our enjoyment of the book, for sure.
I have to say, when now that I'm able to talk to you, I read 2 books because of your recommendations.
Okay.
And none of them have worked for me.
Oh no.
I tried reading Malazan. I tried reading the Brogan Empire trilogy.
Okay.
And none of them worked, unfortunately. But I know we have read a lot of books that we both love, so it's just probably been, could be different reasons for that.
Yeah, Malazan is a series that I'm not sure if I would have enjoyed it as much when I was more of a traditional fantasy reader. I think I'm glad that I read it. The first time I read it, I'm pretty sure I was in my 40s. Early 40s, probably the first time I read it. And even then, there were things that I found very challenging initially. And I realized, okay, he's just doing something very different from what most fantasy authors are doing. Not that it's that uncommon in literature, it's just that it's not that common in fantasy so much. So his, approach to the POVs and his approach to characterization, which I think is brilliant, could throw some people off, initially, by not having that protagonist to grasp onto and say, okay, here's the hero, or here's the group that I'm going to follow for this whole thing and root for. You don't really get that, so it could be confusing, I think, for a lot of readers.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is that no matter how much research you do about the series, you cannot prepare for how overwhelming it is initially. And I had watched so many videos before starting reading Malazan, like watched your videos and other people that had read Malazan, where they explained what to expect when picking up Gardens of the Moon, and had watched so many videos about, just like how Erikson writes characters, plot, and why people love the series, why people don't love it. So I thought I had quite a good grasp and understanding of what to expect when picking up Gardens of the Moon, but it was literally, even though I felt prepared, like I was not prepared for how overwhelming it was to read Gardens of the Moon. It's truly like nothing I've ever read before. And I just felt so overwhelmed. But I did push through because people said, like, just keep reading, try to just enjoy the story. But I think one of the biggest issues I had with the series is not necessarily a criticism of Erikson, but I never knew if I had missed anything. And I know that's a very common thing. And I know, like you mentioned, that you should just try to go with the flow of the story. But I just found it so difficult to go with the flow of the story when I just didn't know if I had missed something really important. I just kept having that feeling, I must have missed something because I read 100 pages and I have no idea what's going on. It's just overwhelming.
Well, the answer to the question, did I miss something while reading Gardens of the Moon, is yes. That was true for me the first time, and I have no doubt it was true for me the second time. But I missed a lot less the second time than I did the first time. I can say that with confidence. And I will probably read it through a third time, I'm sure, and maybe a fourth and a fifth, and I will catch things, I'm sure, even then that I didn't. And that's, you could look at that as, a pro or a con, I suppose. But for me, it's a series that is going to reward reread after reread after reread. So I kind of like that. But I get why people are like, no, I'm sorry. I don't want to use that much of my brain while I'm doing this. So, or just get frustrated. But yeah, Broken
I hope
Empire.
I hope to come back to Malazan someday.
Okay, cool.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
But now I also maybe slightly better understand what to expect. But I agree that when I read, I tend to just want to really enjoy that experience. And reading Malazan just takes a lot of brain power. And I also felt I did something that I know you have recommended not doing, but I tried to understand what I was reading when I read.
I did too, so I'm a hypocrite. But yeah.
I watched videos explaining the different chapters and stuff like that, and I just really started to feel like I wasn't reading for my enjoyment. It was almost like going back to school, trying to understand everything. So it was just a bit too overwhelming. I might come back to it someday, especially since you rate it more highly than Tolkien.
It has become my favorite of all time, and I combine not just the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but for me also, I think it's important for me anyway. Not all Malazan readers agree, but I think I want Esselmont's books in there in the mix, and Erikson's other Malazan books as well, because I really believe that they actually enrich each other, all these different series in that world. So I'm finding that now that I've read all of the books, except for the last one, Esselmont's Assail, that they enrich each other so much in ways that I couldn't not have imagined. So I include everything in that, almost 30 books, at this point.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but yeah, and the other one, Broken Empire, I know that also can be an acquired taste. It's a difficult read. It is a challenging read because for different reasons. Because you have this character who is so morally repugnant, and who is, I think I don't know if you got to the end of Broken Empire or not, all 3 books.
I just read the first book.
Okay, yeah. So I think if you, and I'm not saying you have to do this, but if you were to get to the end of that trilogy, you'd have a different view, not of the character, but of what's going on in the books. Yeah, because what the character does is inexcusable. It's horrible, you know, but you come to understand where that character was coming from. You come to understand where that character ends up. And I think it becomes a very compelling psychological journey that I think Mark Lawrence is incredibly smart. And interestingly, he tends to get sort of painted with the grimdark brush because of Broken Empire. But I would argue that the follow-ups trilogy in the same world, Red Queen's War, is not grimdark. It's a different, it has a very different tone to it altogether, because it's a first-person narrator again, but very different. It's more of a rogue, a lovable rogue character. Yeah. So,
I think my main issue wasn't necessarily that the main character was like horrendous and horrible. Because I knew that going in that I was going to follow this character that like you wouldn't really like connect to. I think my main issue, and maybe this is just like a bit of like stupid for me, but I had like big issues with his age. He was like 9 years old when he started his war band, and he was like 13 years old when he was leading this massive group of like veterans and older soldiers. And like I just didn't feel like Lawrence explained how that makes any sense, why anyone would follow a 9 or 10 year.
So you actually, weirdly, you get more of that as you go through the trilogy. The why.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he does a ton of flashbacks. So you don't get the full story of his childhood until you finish the third book. So it might make
maybe I should continue then. I just don't see how Lawrence could make that reasonable.
It's a
or
challenge.
Rational, but maybe he pulls it off.
It's almost as if this guy sat down and said, what would be some of the most challenging things I could do as an author? And one is to write a protagonist who is morally repugnant. And two is to write, how does it even make sense that a 9-year-old could start a war band, you know, or a 13-year-old lead all these hardened men, you know? So that all makes much more sense as you get through the trilogy. But
I should maybe continue. They're quite quick reads as well. So
they're not big, huge books. What he does is gradually fill you in with these flashbacks that change your perception of the previous books in some ways. So I think it's really cool. And then if you read Red Queen's War, because it's a concurrent trilogy in the same world, that again changes your view of Broken Empire. And it, particularly in the realm of world building, there are things that you'll understand after reading Red Queen's War that will affect how you interpret Broken Empire as well. So it's very intricately put together. Really cool stuff.
I definitely need to read more Lawrence. I tried reading. Have you read One Word Kill? It's one of his sci-fi like novellas.
No, I'm actually going to read pretty soon. I'm going to read Book of the Ancestor. That's
the
assassin.
I heard a lot of great things about that series.
So.
I have one question.
Okay.
If that's okay, since you're an academic and so on. I just wondered, so I've always had the impression that a lot of people don't think that fantasy has a lot of literary merit or value. And obviously you've been reading fantasy for a long time. So I suppose I have two questions. Being academic, have you also experienced that people don't think fantasy has a literary value, or is that just maybe some misconception from my part? And secondly, has that changed? Like, do academics like see more value in fantasy now than they have, or is that still like an issue?
Oh, these are good questions. So the short answers are yes and yes.
All right.
So, and to elaborate just a wee bit on that, yes, I do think that within academia, there's a lot of snobbery. Let's just put it the way, let's just keep it real here. There's a lot of snobbery where you'll have people who want to assert that their particular little corner is somehow superior to all this other stuff over here, and there couldn't possibly be anything of value over here. Oh, this is where it all is, this tiny little corner here that I'm focusing on. So that definitely happens. I did a video on a writer that I really love, at least what I've read of him. I think Salman Rushdie is brilliant. But he did this.
Oh, yeah, I saw that video. So
he had this essay where he was defending the use of the fantastic in literature, but then he kind of disparaged fantasy as a genre at the same time, and saying, no, I do magic realism, which is really much better than all that genre fluff over there. So that I think is very unfortunate, and it is something you do see, and I think it's sort of sad because the stakes are so low, and because it's almost territorial in a way. And humanities are so under attack in general. And I think a lot of academics feel defensive, that they have to somehow defend the value of what they do. And often, unfortunately, that takes the form of, this is valuable, but all that other stuff is not, somehow to assert that you're better than others is sort of a bullying tactic, I suppose. But it also comes from a place of vulnerability, I think. But the second part is there growing? Is there growing recognition of the value? I think yes, for sure. So you would not have had, I don't think, 20 or 30 years ago, people like A.P. Canavan with a PhD in fantasy narratology, right? You can do a PhD in fantasy now. So
that's really exciting.
I think that there is that conference that I went to, ICFA, has been around for 43 years. So there were definitely academics 43 years ago who recognized the value of fantasy. And I think it's growing, that recognition, but there's still plenty of work to do in changing that perception.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because these same academics will still give a lot of praise to Tolkien, but then they'll say all the other fantasy is just escapism.
And it's ironic because when Tolkien in his own time, was disparaged. And people said, oh, what is this silly children's story, and that sort of thing. And he was, I think, if you read his letters, I think even he was somewhat embarrassed, because he was a very respected scholar of Old English and very knowledgeable, and has some very important essays in his field. And he really did separate his creative life, and was, I think, just a little bit embarrassed by it, perhaps.
He probably was,
which is a shame, because obviously it's so wonderful and has inspired so much. But so even in his time, his work suffered from that prejudice as well. Do
you then see more studies into fantasy going forward, happening?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I view that what we do here on BookTube is a contribution to, I know that we're not doing it in a serious scholarly academic way for the most part. I'm not, I'm not following, MLA format when I'm, citing, this and that. And I'm not being that formal, but I think that even what we do here can be contributing toward that analysis, that broader analysis of the storytelling that we do within the fantasy genre. So, and it gives me hope when I see thoughtful and wonderful people like you contributing to all this dialogue. It makes me happy, because I'm excited by what we can do here on BookTube, for sure.
You said you've seen a change in the past, I don't know, years. Well, what has changed? Do you think there are some particular events or anything that has?
I think it's complicated. Beyond fantasy as well, there's been recognition that you can do serious study of popular culture. So that's a thing. You can do advanced degrees in popular culture. We've realized that there are whole realms that are worthy of study that tell us about what we are and you know and where we come from and where we're going, and that to me is a good thing, you know. So that also is, I think the recognition of fantasy as a realm of legitimate study is part of that broader movement to open things up a bit. But also there's just been recognition of the value of storytelling within fantasy as advocates of the genre. You know, in the beginning, they were from different fields. Like, you know, I'm a medievalist. I study medieval literature. That's my day job, right? But my passion also is fantasy, and I think the two are very related to each other. So a lot of the actually earlier Tolkien scholars, for example, like Tom Shippey, is a medievalist, you know, by training. But now you have people who are actually getting, like I said, degrees specifically on fantasy. So
interesting.
Yeah.
If you would you have done your PhD on fantasy if you did it today?
That's a really good question. If I could start all over and do my PhD, I would be sorely tempted. I really would.
Study Malazan, probably.
Oh, I mean, people could write endless dissertations on the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the rest of the Malazan's world. I think because I'm also very passionate about the medieval literature. And also because at the end of the day, it's probably as pathetic as it sounds, it's so hard to find a job in academia. And the more new and perhaps different your specialty is, the more difficult it is. So you have to think about, okay, as a specialist in medieval literature, how many jobs are out there? As a specialist in fantasy, how many jobs are out there?
You know? There can't be many.
And it's like this many if you're a medievalist, but it's this many if you're in fantasy. So it's kind of that's probably why ultimately I might still do medieval. But hopefully somebody, you know, people with fantasy PhDs are going to find jobs in the future, teaching and that sort of thing.
It's very niche. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, academia tends to be very niche. It encourages nicheness. In many ways. But I'm aware that you have things to do, that you have people to see, places to go. So I don't want to take too much of your time, and I've actually already gone over what I promised I was going to do with you, because I had a good time talking with you. But any last...
it feels so. It feels amazing to actually talk to someone that understands what I'm talking about. Because you never really meet fantasy enthusiasts in real life, or it's at least very rare. So it's been a really good time.
We have to find each other on YouTube.
So thank you so much for having me on.
Oh man, the pleasure has been mine. I'm gonna sound like an old man now, but it gives me so much joy and hope when I get to talk to people like you, because I see that passion in you, and the fact is, it keeps me probably a little bit younger too, when I get to talk to people like you and learn from you as well. So it's been such a pleasure, Johan, having you here and talking with you. And I'm so grateful that you're on BookTube and sharing your passion with all of us. And I look forward to perhaps more discussions with you in the future, but definitely watching your videos and learning from them. And I wish you all the best on your reading journey.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it feels surreal to be talking to you, because I've been watching your videos for 2 years. So before this chat, I almost felt like I knew you, but obviously you didn't have that same feeling. But it's been, it's quite surreal to be chatting here. But thank you so much for inviting me.
The pleasure is mine. And everybody, please check out this wonderful person's channel. Check out Library of a Viking. I will put a link to it in the description below. It is rapidly growing for good reasons. There's a lot of great stuff happening on Library of a Viking. So I very much encourage you to go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching this. And until next time.